Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Hey everyone, and welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
I'm ready.
Awesome. So today we're tackling a really fascinating chapter in Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s journey, his 1966 campaign in Chicago.
Yeah.
You know, most people know about his monumental work in the South,
Right.
but his time in Chicago is often overlooked. And it was really a shame because it reveals so much about his evolving views on race, poverty, and the fight for true equality.
It really does.
To guide our exploration, we're going to be drawing from a fantastic episode of the Mr. Hutchings History podcast.
Oh, I love that podcast.
It's so good. So what makes King's Chicago campaign so compelling, aside from just being, historically significant?
Well, it's a really interesting point in King's journey as he shifts his focus from securing voting rights in the South
Right.
to tackling the deeply ingrained issues of poverty and housing discrimination in the North.
It's like he conquered one mountain and then set his sights on an even bigger one. And get this, when King moved his family into a rundown apartment in Chicago's West Side ghetto,
Okay.
it caused such a stir that the landlord frantically tried to fix it up.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Can you believe it? The power of King's presence alone spurred action where years of neglect had failed.
That's a great anecdote, and it really highlights what King was trying to achieve, shining a light on the horrific living conditions faced by so many Black families.
Right. These weren't just political talking points for him.
No.
He and his family lived in that cramped, sweltering apartment,
It's true.
experiencing firsthand the daily indignities of poverty.
Yeah, it's hard to even fathom trying to raise a family
Right.
in a place with no safe spaces for kids to play, battling the heat with no escape.
Right. It really puts things in perspective.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just about the discomfort.
Yeah.
There's a story about a fire hydrant incident where neighborhood kids opened it to cool off,
Oh, yeah.
but police intervened.
Of course.
It was King who intervened, got the kids released, and even convinced Mayor Daley to keep hydrants open during heat waves.
Wow. Talk about being a man of the people.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's living the struggle, shining a light on these conditions, but how did he actually try to change things?
Well, he didn't shy away from bold actions.
Okay.
He and SCLC aides actually took over a dilapidated building
What?
and started repairs themselves, arguing that sometimes moral imperatives outweigh legal technicalities.
Hold on, SCLC.
Oh, right.
I know you and I are familiar with that, but
Yeah.
for our listener, can we quickly explain what that is?
Of course. The SCLC, or Southern Christian Leadership Conference,
Right.
was the organization King led.
Okay.
It was instrumental in the civil rights movement, particularly in the South.
Thanks for clarifying.
You bet.
So King and the SCLC are taking matters into their own hands. They're
Mhm.
making a statement.
Absolutely.
But did these tactics work in Chicago?
That's where things get complicated.
Uh-oh.
King faced major obstacles in Chicago. His Southern strategies, which relied heavily on mobilizing Black churches,
Right.
didn't quite resonate with the more diverse and fragmented activist landscape in Chicago.
So it's a different ballgame up north.
Very different.
Right. Okay.
He faced skepticism from local leaders who felt he was an outsider.
Oh, so he's encountering a whole new set of challenges in the north.
Absolutely.
What about his goals?
Okay.
What was he specifically fighting for in Chicago?
The Chicago Freedom Movement, which King was a part of, aimed to improve housing and job opportunities for Black residents.
Okay.
But it struggled to pinpoint specific galvanizing issues.
Interesting.
There was a sense that it lacked the clear focus of the Southern campaigns,
Right.
which were largely centered around dismantling segregation laws.
So he's facing a whole different set of circumstances, and he's dealing with Mayor Daley,
Yes.
who wasn't exactly known for being progressive on racial issues.
Right.
How did that relationship play out?
Their interactions were tense. King felt Daley wasn't truly committed to change.
Okay.
And their meeting ended up being more of a clash of personalities and ideologies than a productive dialogue.
So not a lot of common ground there.
Not really.
It sounds like this whole Chicago campaign was a real uphill battle for King.
It definitely was.
He's facing new challenges, battling systemic issues, and, he's also living the struggle alongside the people he's trying to help.
That's an important point.
Where do we go from here?
Well, to understand the full impact of King's time in Chicago,
Yeah.
we need to look at it through different lenses. Historians offer various perspectives on its significance,
I like it.
and that's what we'll explore next. All right, so let's put on our historian hats for a moment.
Okay, I'm ready.
Different schools of thought have emerged,
Okay.
each offering a unique take on King's Chicago campaign and what it meant for the civil rights movement.
Let's break it down.
Okay, well, for social historians,
Yeah.
King's move north marked a significant shift.
In what way?
It moved the fight beyond securing voting rights and into the realm of economic justice.
Right, because having legal equality on paper is one thing.
Exactly.
But it doesn't guarantee true economic opportunity.
It doesn't.
Okay, so that's the social historian's view.
Yeah, they see it as a crucial turning point.
Gotcha.
Because he was exposing how northern cities, even without explicit Jim Crow laws, were perpetuating segregation and oppression through policies that kept black communities trapped in poverty.
So even though the North didn't have those blatant whites-only signs, they had these hidden systems that were just as harmful.
Precisely.
Wow.
And revisionist historians take this idea even further.
Okay.
They argue that by addressing urban black poverty, King's Chicago campaign broadened the entire scope of the civil rights movement.
Interesting.
Encompassing issues like economic disparities and housing injustice that had previously been overlooked.
So even though he wasn't racking up the same kind of legislative victories as he did in the South, he was shifting the national conversation in a profound way.
Exactly. It forced America to confront the fact that racism wasn't just a Southern problem.
Yeah.
It was deeply embedded in the fabric of northern cities as well.
That's a huge shift in perspective.
It is.
Okay, that's social and revisionist history.
Right.
What about the psychological perspective?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
I feel like that's particularly relevant given King's personal experience living in those conditions.
Yeah, right. It has a really important dimension.
Yeah.
Psychological analyses highlight the devastating mental and physical toll that poverty takes on families, especially children.
Right. And remember, King's own family endured those same hardships.
Exactly. It wasn't just an abstract concept for them.
Right.
It was their reality.
It makes you realize that even the most prominent figures weren't immune to those pressures.
Exactly. There's a story about King's son, Dexter, who developed a stutter during their time in Chicago.
Oh, wow. I didn't know.
Some believe it was a direct result of the stress and anxiety of living in that environment.
That's heartbreaking.
It is.
You know, I remember reading that Coretta Scott King, despite being a strong advocate for social justice, really struggled with their living situation in Chicago.
I can imagine.
It must have been incredibly difficult for her.
Absolutely. It shows that these weren't just political or intellectual battles. They were deeply personal struggles.
Now, there's one more perspective we haven't touched on, the Marxist view.
Right.
What's their take on King's Chicago campaign?
Marxist historians go even deeper, arguing that Chicago forced King to confront the very nature of capitalism.
Interesting.
And its role in perpetuating inequality.
So it's not just about individual prejudice anymore. It's about how the entire system is set up to benefit some at the expense of others.
Exactly. Chicago forced King to grapple with these fundamental questions of economic power and justice.
Wow, all these different lenses really add layers to our understanding of this period.
They do.
But regardless of which perspective you take, one thing's clear.
What's that?
Chicago was a turning point for King.
Absolutely. His time in Chicago solidified his belief that freedom wasn't just about voting rights.
Right.
True freedom meant having access to decent housing, economic opportunities, and a life of dignity for all people.
And he famously said,
He did.
I worked to get these people the right to eat hamburgers.
Yes.
And now I've got to do something to help them get the money to buy it.
That's such a powerful quote.
It really is.
It perfectly captures the limitations of legal victories.
Right.
If people are still trapped in a system that denies them basic economic security.
You're exactly right. It highlights the evolution of his thinking.
Yes.
He realized that dismantling legal segregation was just the first step in a much larger struggle for economic justice.
A much larger struggle.
So even though Chicago wasn't a clear-cut victory in terms of tangible outcomes, it fundamentally shaped King's vision for the future.
Absolutely. His experience there directly informed his later work.
Okay.
Particularly the Poor People's Campaign, which he launched in 1968.
You know, we've been mentioning the Poor People's Campaign throughout this deep dive.
We have.
Can you tell me a little more about it and how it connected to King's experiences in Chicago?
Of course. The Poor People's Campaign was, in many ways, the culmination of King's evolving understanding of poverty and systemic injustice.
Okay.
An understanding that really began to crystallize during his time in Chicago.
So Chicago was really the catalyst for this broader vision.
It was. The goal was to bring thousands of impoverished people from all across America, Black, white, Hispanic,
Wow.
to Washington, D.C. to demand economic justice from the federal government.
So it was about uniting people across racial lines to fight for a common goal.
Exactly. King recognized that poverty was a shared experience, a systemic issue that affected people from all walks of life.
Right.
He saw the Poor People's Campaign as a way to build a multiracial coalition, demanding a fairer distribution of wealth and resources in America.
This is really blowing my mind.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It's like we're seeing the civil rights movement unfold before our eyes.
Yeah.
Witnessing this incredible evolution of thought and strategy. It wasn't just a static movement. It was constantly adapting and responding to the challenges of the time.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It was a dynamic, evolving movement that continually expanded its scope to encompass new challenges and new understandings of what true equality meant. And King was at the forefront of that evolution, constantly pushing the boundaries of what was possible.
This is making me think about all those history books that portray the civil rights movement as this neat and tidy narrative with clear-cut victories and a definitive ending.
Yeah, it's often oversimplified.
But the reality is so much more complex and nuanced.
Absolutely. History isn't a straight line.
Right.
It's a messy and multifaceted process.
Okay.
And King's journey, especially his time in Chicago, exemplifies that complexity.
It's fascinating how focusing on this one chapter in his life can reveal so much about the broader struggle for social and economic justice in America.
Yeah.
It's like peering through a keyhole into a much larger story.
You've got it.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the interconnectedness of things, how seemingly isolated events can ripple outward and shape the course of history.
So we've explored the challenges King faced in Chicago, the evolution of his thinking, and the lasting impact of his campaign.
Absolutely.
What's the key takeaway here?
You got it.
How does all of this connect to our lives today?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
How do we translate these historical insights into meaningful action in the present?
Yeah, because it's easy to get caught up in the historical details and forget that this isn't just some abstract academic exercise.
I know.
It's about real people, real struggles, and the ongoing fight for justice.
Exactly, and that fight is far from over.
Right.
The issues that King confronted in Chicago poverty, housing discrimination, economic inequality, are still very much alive today.
It's like we're still grappling with the same fundamental questions about what it means to be a just and equitable society.
Exactly. And King's legacy reminds us that achieving true justice requires more than just legal reforms.
Okay.
It demands a fundamental shift in our values, our priorities, and the way we structure our economic systems.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's something our listener can reflect on?
Good question.
How can they connect King's story to their own life and experiences?
Here's a thought-provoking question.
Okay.
How do the echoes of King's Chicago campaign resonate in your own community today?
I like that.
What forms of economic inequality or housing injustice do you see around you?
I love that. It's about taking those historical lessons and applying them to the world we live in right now. Yeah, it's like he's challenging us to look in the mirror and really examine our own roles in perpetuating these systems.
Absolutely. And it's not enough to just acknowledge these problems.
Right.
The real challenge is figuring out what we can do about them.
Yeah, that's where I get stuck.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Like these systems are just too big, too entrenched to change.
Yeah, like where do you even begin to tackle something as massive as systemic poverty or housing discrimination?
It's a valid feeling.
Yeah.
But I think King's approach offers some valuable insights.
Okay, like what?
Well, he wasn't afraid to start small, tackling specific issues on a local level.
Right.
While always keeping his eye on the bigger picture.
Okay.
Remember those tenant unions he helped organize in Chicago?
Yeah.
Those were about empowering people in their own communities to fight for better living conditions.
So it's about finding that balance between grassroots activism and pushing for broader systemic change.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that lasting change happens on multiple levels.
Okay.
It requires both bottom-up pressure from communities demanding justice and top-down reforms that address the structural roots of inequality.
Right, so it's a multi-pronged approach.
It is.
And King understood the power of coalition building, right?
Absolutely.
Like with the Poor People's Campaign.
Exactly.
He brought together diverse groups who shared that common goal of economic justice.
Exactly. Solidarity is key. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected.
Yeah.
That an injustice to one is an injustice to all.
Okay.
We can achieve so much more when we work together.
Right.
Pooling our resources and amplifying each other's voices.
It's like that saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Perfectly put. Now, thinking back to those echoes of King's Chicago campaign we were discussing, what comes to mind for you?
You know, it's funny, but I've been thinking about the affordable housing crisis in my own city.
Oh.
We see tent cities popping up, families struggling to make rent, and it's easy to feel helpless.
I know.
But hearing about King's work in Chicago reminds me that even small actions can make a difference.
That's such an important realization.
Yeah.
And it speaks to the enduring power of King's legacy.
Right.
He reminds us that the fight for equality isn't some abstract historical event.
Right.
It's a living, breathing struggle that continues in our own communities every day.
So maybe instead of getting overwhelmed by the enormity of the problem, we should focus on what we can do right here, right now.
Precisely. Volunteering at a local food bank.
Okay.
Supporting organizations that are fighting for affordable housing. Speaking out against injustice in our own circles. These are all ways to keep King's spirit alive.
This deep dive has really been an eye-opener for me.
It has.
It's made me realize that the civil rights movement wasn't just about achieving legal equality. It was about creating a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive regardless of their background.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And that vision is something we should all strive for.
Yeah.
It's about creating a world where everyone has access to quality education, affordable health care, decent housing, and a fair shot at economic success.
It's a vision worth fighting for.
It is.
And King's story reminds us that even in the face of immense challenges, hope and action are always possible.
Well said.
Yeah.
And that's a powerful message to carry with us as we navigate the complexities of the world today.
This has been an incredibly insightful conversation.
It has been.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise.
Oh, of course.
And for helping us unpack this important chapter in Dr. King's life.
My pleasure.
And to our listener, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes, thank you.
We hope you've gained a new appreciation for Dr. King's work and how his legacy continues to shape the fight for justice today.
Remember, the journey toward a more equitable world requires constant learning, reflection, and action.
Absolutely.
We each have a role to play, and together we can make a difference.
Until next time, keep asking questions.
Yes.
Keep challenging the status quo.
Please do.
And keep striving for a better world.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.